This is
Make It Plain.
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make It Plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, she's known as the election whisperer. She's an editor with The Cycle. She's been an advisor to Project Lincoln. She's also known as the Doc, and she has set herself apart in terms of her election analysis and predictions over the past few years. We're happy to have her back here on Make It Plain. Rachel Bitecofer is with us. Rachel, how are you?
I am good. It is a huge relief knowing that stage one of removing Donald Trump from the presidency is accomplished. Getting stage two of that process, of course, Biden's hand on Bible powers of the presidency sucked out of Donald Trump and put into Biden is now the goal. And that is usually, an unceremonious, guaranteed process, and certainly is more likely to succeed than fail here, but it's not a total given either. It feels like it's going to be a slog all the way to that moment. And I'm not embarrassed to confess the tension that began in my stomach around 8 p.m. election night, November 16, 2016, when I realized that Donald Trump was going to be the president, and all that would entail in terms of the immense danger for the country, domestically and internationally. Just knowing what I do about government as a professor of political science, it was such an intense tension. It has resided there ever since, every moment of every day. And to know that power is no longer his will be an immense relief. But of course, we're going to be coming into a reality in which, he will be leaving, having poisoned the well of public opinion against Biden. The whole of the Republican Party has joined him in that process, so that to run for office in 2022 as a Republican will mean that you'll have to tell voters that Biden is an illegitimate president that stole the election. Our problems are not going to go away, but having the powers of the presidency not vested in that man is a massive, imminent danger reduction.
One small step for the presidency, I guess, one giant step for our democracy, just getting him out.
Yes.
But clearly there's a lot more to be done. Well, election night 2020, we've not talked since then, or we haven't talked in a while, but definitely not since then. What were you feeling on election night 2020? How right were you this go round?
Yeah, on election night 2020, I was feeling a mixed bag of things, right? Because we weren't watching a normal election process play out, right? What we were watching was a plan that Trump and his Republican allies at the RNC, Bill Barr, the Attorney General, and others had constructed to help him formulate the potential to steal the election in the event that he came up short, but not too short, right? And so for months, I had been, trying to get people to pay attention to chess pieces that they had been moving in preparation of, moving, number one, sequestering Democratic voters into the vote by mail system. Of course, Democrats were sequestering themselves into that system quite effectively, too, for a long time. It took them a long time to stop telling Democrats to vote by mail. Mm-hmm. And, I and others had to aggressively say, stop telling people to do that. Like, they're like literally laying a trap there. Like, you can't do that. And, this is amazing, the coordination and skill by which the GOP laid this plan with the, entering of DeJoy into the USPS and, gumming up the works there, and Trump turning Republican voters away from vote by mail, which you could see in survey research data. So it was quite brilliant, this long executed plan. And then their goal, of course, was to create what they called that red mirage, where on election night, it was going to look like Donald Trump won the election and that he was, president-elect, right? And the whole plan hinged on narrow margins in the Midwest, especially where they had forbidden the state legislature from the Democrats, the governors there, from changing the laws to allow for preemptive counting of absentee ballots. Usually it's about 5% of the electorate there in those states. Pennsylvania is 5%, who relied on mail voting or absentee voting. So the laws were set up to accommodate that amount of traffic. And once it became obvious that like 40% of the electorate might rely on remote voting, the Democrats said, let's change the law that said you cannot count those ballots until all election day voting is done. So basically midnight of election night. The Democrats wanted to say, let's do what Florida does, which actually has a very sophisticated institutionalized vote by mail system. The Republicans, to do this plan, prohibited that to happen because they knew that if they didn't do that, that the vote count that night would heavily favor Trump. And then their goal was to rely on ballots that came in postmarked before election day but didn't arrive on time and challenge those retroactively. So they were hoping that Biden's win would rely on those types of ballots. And the only reason, for all the people who are out there now, like, poo-pooing like the fear that Trump would steal the election, literally the only reason this plan failed, this long executed plan that had multiple stages to it, is because the margins were not narrow, that they could not rely on these late arriving ballots because Biden's win was, dependent on ballots that had already been sitting at these election offices. So it's a pretty thin and frankly lucky, outcome that allowed democracy to survive in America. It's certainly not something where I would say the guardrails, were prominent. These judicial rulings, yes, have been very, very solid on behalf of Democrats, but that's because they were forced to go and argue to exclude ballots that had been sitting there, for 2 weeks before election day, right? If the arguments had come down to these late arriving ballots, I think the courts might have been much more receptive to the arguments, frankly, and we would be talking about a much more likely scenario of them potentially being able to win, especially at the higher levels. I think the most likely outcome would have been wins at the district and appeals court level, and then getting to the Supreme Court, where we might have found a new jurisprudence emerge, right?
Right.
Yeah. So,
and that would have been scary. But you're right. Everything has been pretty solid. You too have been somewhat critical of the Democrats in this process in terms of their electioneering.
Yes.
And outreach, right?
Well, very. I mean, the reason we saw my forecast manifest pretty much exactly right for the presidential cycle, which is, getting back to your other question, I got off topic a bit. Getting back to your other question, we see a bifurcated outcome, right? We see the forecast almost perform exactly as predicted 16 months before the election, before Joe Biden became the nominee, before coronavirus came and destroyed the American economy and killed 245,000 by election day, I think it was, Americans, and growing, at a tune now, I think, of close to 2,000 Americans a day. Before all of those things happened, I put out a forecast that said, look, this is what's going to happen on election day. We're going to see the Democrats win. It's going to be a return of this blue wall. It's not even really going to be close on the blue wall because it was, people misunderstand what happened there in 2016 in the first place. It's not so much of a working class white revolution of populist Trump angst as much as a story of disappeared turnout for Democrats and wasted third-party balloting, where we're talking about 5, 6, 7% of vote share, two-party vote share, going instead to third-party candidates. I mean, we think about how astounding that is. I mean, that's a lot of vote when we're talking about 5% of a vote share not going to Clinton or Trump, right? And the way that the traditional analysts talked about 2016 was all about Trump winning over the Midwest. Well, that is not what the data says. He doesn't crack 50% in any of those swing states except for 2 states, Iowa and Ohio. And that's because they are, in this big political realignment that we have of college educated voters moving one way and non-college educated voters moving the other. Those 2 states are caught up in a realignment more robustly than the other areas of the northern tier of the Midwest are. So my data and my theory knew very solidly that we'd be seeing a return. Give me a second. Gabriel, this is not a show that you can do that on, okay? Usually you can, but not on this. Knew very robustly that we'd be seeing an agitated Democratic coalition, which of course includes Democrats, but also independents that vote with Democrats because they lean Democrat. And we would also be seeing a swing back of pure independents that went Obama, Trump, and now Biden, because they are generally going to break against the status quo. They usually find the status quo sucks because they don't know much about election or politics. They don't follow things very closely, but they are usually unhappy with the status quo. Definitely in this scenario, from the time I released the original forecast, the status quo was pretty stable, right? It was a good economy and things were just rolling along. As we moved to the cycle and COVID rolled in and destroyed the economy, the status quo became very bad. So it was, under my estimation, even worse for Donald Trump under that pure independent breakdown. And so my original forecast said those 3 Midwestern bellwethers are all going back to the Democrats. And then in that realignment process, you have Arizona, which is moving towards the left. And, in that realignment of the Sun Belt, it's the leading indicator because its political activism began in 2010, where, millennial Latinos especially got activated by the Show Me Your Papers, overreach of the Jan Brewer administration, Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Those are the things that activate people politically, is when they're targeted, right, to lose rights or to lose something that they care about. If it's gun folks or whatever, right? So, that evolutional track in Texas, to me, was probably too early statewide, but I was looking specifically at state legislative and congressional races. And so when I said we have a bifurcated outcome, and I've been yelling at Democratic electioneering stuff on Twitter, that's what I'm really talking about, is why, with the best fundamentals you could possibly hope for, and a massively unpopular incumbent who is mismanaging 2 large crises, the pandemic and the economic collapse, you have a political party that goes in, every analyst, not just myself, arguing that they should be not only protecting their gains from 2018, but adding to them, right? Instead, we come into an election night where, yay, we're dislodging Donald Trump exactly and literally to, like, as I wrote, we're going to see these suburban surges. We're going to see the story of 2020 is going to be about the suburban surge, not the rural stuff that we saw in 2016. We see exactly everything we're supposed to see there, but why not in Congress? And the story is that the DNC and its 3 campaign arms that it controls, the DCCC, the DSCC, and the DLCC, are not good at electioneering, right? They are running, they rely on a consultant class too. So, like, to keep in mind, it's not like the people sitting in the administrative positions of the DLCC know how to run campaigns. They rely on professionals that they consult with who tell them this is what you should do to win this race, right? Or to win this election cycle. That is where they are getting steered wrong, right? That information that's coming into them is not taking into account political polarization, hyperpartisanship, the reality of the American electorate, which is a low information electorate. It doesn't know all of the things that Donald Trump is doing. It needs those things told to them, frankly. It needs to be told that Donald Trump's children are milking their positions in government that they shouldn't have to begin with to personally enrich themselves, because they don't know that, of the debate audience, the assumption that the Biden team made that they don't need to come back with that as Hunter Biden is assaulted is such a flawed assumption, because I guarantee you at least half of that debate audience had no idea. They have no idea about Jared and Ivanka Trump's excesses in government. They don't follow the news. They don't know who Mitch McConnell is, right? And the Democrats are constantly on offense, right? So they had a messaging strategy. It was the exact same messaging strategy they designed in 2018, which is issues focused, and it's issues focused, cerebral, brain, right? Not emotive, heart and gut. Here's what will happen to you, to your family, if Republicans win the election. And it's usually very, very policy wonky argumentation, which is fine if you're talking to us, right? But that's not who elections are for. They're for them, the other people, these people who don't read the news, who don't find that stuff interesting. If they found that stuff interesting, then that would be a different story, right? But they don't. So they need to be spoken to on their terms, on their level. And the Republican Party inherently gets this. So for the last 20 years, they have been fine-tuning an electioneering apparatus that is just second to none, right? So on one side, you have this electioneering strategy that takes these congressional races, does what's called nationalizes them. So makes them a story for voters that is, hey, this is about control of the Senate. This little race here with this guy, John Smith, that you have never heard of and don't give a hoot about. This race, actually, if you vote in it, will save your Second Amendment rights. If you don't vote in it, they're gonna make guns illegal, right? Not even rational, right? It doesn't, like, the Democrats get caught up in, well, that's not true. Okay, that's not really something that could happen. That doesn't matter, right? Like, on the Republican side, they understand that if you tell voters that and make it high stakes, they're more apt to show up. And they understand that at the end of the day, these Georgia Senate runoffs are going to be decided based on, when you look at the electorate, the percent of Republicans that turn out and cast ballots compared to the percent of Democrats, okay? And unless Democrats equalize or come close to it, the percent of ballots cast in those races, both of those races are going to lose, okay? End of story, full stop, period. That is not how the DSCC thought about North Carolina, okay? That's not how they think about these races. They do not conceptualize them that way, which is a really tremendously bad mistake. Because, if you're not focused on, like, the Stacey Abrams reality of, okay, we've got more people out there that think and feel the way that we do, but we don't talk to them. We don't register them to vote. We don't go out there and activate them. We instead run our campaigns purely on, there's a voter file, and the voter file identifies independents either by party registration, because that's a state where you register by party, or by like a modeled independent, right? And the campaign resources are devoted towards, let's win the argument amongst independents, okay? Number one, it's not that you don't go into that space and spend resources there, though the more sophisticated you can be about identifying who truly is a pure independent versus one of these leaners, the better those resources can be deployed. Number two, the argument that we're presenting in persuasion is ineffective, right? We're not doing, we could do a persuasion, but the type of things that we argue now, that we're not winning there, right? We need a whole new persuasion argument approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, like Stacey Abrams is arguing, I'm arguing, you also need to be doing simultaneously a very robust effort on registration until the registration date cuts off, and stimulation of turnout of young people, of people of color, of women who are single, college educated people who fall for sure, even if they're not Democrats, they could be lean Democrat independents, because 9 out of 10 times when someone leans one way or the other, they vote for that party, right? So they're fakers, is what I said on the Daily Show when I was in there, with a little bit more flourish, but they're basically fakers. They pretend to be independent, even to themselves maybe, but ultimately when they cast ballots, 9 out of 10 times, it's that party that they lean towards, right? So what we need is messaging. So like my Georgia campaign, if I can get down there, is there's 2 different things that I'm bringing. The first one I think is going to be very effective at this particular part of the problem. And what it does is it tells the voter, you are one voter, right? And your decision to show up to vote can vote 2 senators into office. And those 2 senators will give Joe Biden control of the Senate, and with it, the ability to actually govern. Because if they don't control the Senate, there's no governing. Okay. There's nothing that's going to be happening. Mitch McConnell is going to, kill every single thing that Biden wants to do. But like with those 2 senators, you could bring health insurance back to 28 million people if the court strikes down the ACA. You could there's 11 million dreamers in this country. The Trump administration is so cruel. They deported this one young man to Iraq, even though they knew that he wouldn't be able to get insulin there for his diabetes. He's from Detroit, Michigan, and he died, right? I mean, that one vote, one decision to show up and vote on January 5th, for these 2 Democratic senators could save millions of lives. That's how you talk. That's how you have to talk to people who are not us, who don't see or immediately understand the value of politics, of their role in the political system and their participation. You have to have a conversation with them that makes them understand why it is valuable for them to show up. And it's not some wonky policy combo about healthcare. It's about the greater, role that participation does. And here's the worst part about it. The reason that the DSCC or the SEC or the DNC for years has refused to do this is they think that if they run ads like this, that it will make more Republicans vote. Okay. Well, I put this theory to a test last cycle in 2018. It's like, okay, now I'm doing this voter file analysis. It's the hard data. I'm going to find out. Is there a difference? These blue dog Democrats who were so careful not to inflame Republicans, not to talk about Donald Trump, not to talk about policies in a bold way that might get Republicans upset, did they actually hold Republican turnout down? Because in 2018, because Trump's style is all negative partisanship, unlike with the 2 Obama midterms, Republican turnout went up. It didn't go down, okay? And that's why they saved those races in Georgia and Texas and Florida. They went up, okay? And I learned a lot. I learned that you can artificially stimulate negative partisanship, especially if you don't have it in competent electioneering system, right? And so I went and I looked at these blue dog candidates versus people who just ran regular Democratic or liberal Democratic candidate. These are all frontliners, though, the 40 top districts, okay, not going beyond that, these 40 most competitive districts. And there was no benefit, literally none. The turnout for GOP voters surged in every single district, even though the Democrats had the giant wave at their back, and proportionally, because their turnout was so bad in 2014, it was much bigger, their surge in 2018, than the surges for Republicans. Even then, though, the Republicans still outvoted Democrats proportionally. Their percent of registered voters was still higher turnout than Democrats because they get good electioneering materials. They get, stakes framing. They get nationalized messaging. They get a ton of resources put in on GeoTV, on Field, all the things. All I'm trying to do is get Democrats to modernize their system and adopt some of these techniques that are already being deployed against them. It's not like I'm trying to teach a horse to drink water for the first time, right?
Right.
We know these things will work, right? And of course, there are adaptations that I'll be showing along the way that you put in two things that you're going to adapt for. Liberals think and feel differently than conservatives, right? So you aren't going to hit them exactly the same way with exactly the same thing. And number two, some of the techniques that the Republicans used drove their base nuts, right? It's psychological warfare. So you don't want to go full GOP, right? You don't want to be irresponsible and, drive your base nuts and do things that are psychologically manipulative to the point where you're causing psychological harm. Because my book, The Fear Factory, where I go through the media and campaign systems of the right, that it does argue that point that the Republican, fear capitalist did harm, psychological harm to their electorate. And we are seeing the effects of that.
We're definitely seeing the effects of that. And I agree with you in terms of the consultant class. And it's not leading the horse to drink from water it hasn't already drank from. I think what Stacey has been trying to do, what she has done, I mean, we have her to thank in spite of the consultant class and the DCC. What she has been able to do, obviously, Rachel, is go back to the well water that Jesse Jackson first brought the Democratic Party to.
Yes.
Registering voters, messaging. But you're right, the consultant class is, shh, it's not, and I'm like, what? Who are you? Don't say anything. Just be real quiet and just kind of don't push back. I don't think it was scripted, but I wonder if you agree with me. When Kamala was at her debate, see, I think this is an example of what you're talking about in terms of emoting. When she went on that riff about healthcare, if you have pre-existing conditions, they're coming for you. Yeah. If you have insulin, they're coming. That was one of the strongest punches.
Yes.
From the ticket.
Yes.
You couldn't help. And of course, I'm partisan, but I put myself outside of my partisanship. There's no way the average person could have heard that and not been affected by it.
No doubt.
Did you see that? It just it was over then.
Yeah, I was so proud. And so what I'm trying to do with this new initiative that I can't specify yet, but I will be able to specify soon, is bring that every day to the left. Because right now it has been needed for 20 years. And for 20 years, more really, but 20 years, the right has articulated a strategic plan that they have been executing against the left that has destroyed the Democratic brand, has, put us on perpetual defense. And it has, the DNC and the Democratic orgs have not responded. They just simply haven't. And the 2020 election, that the wasted, it was the reapportionment and redistricting cycle. It just has to be. It just has to be the last time. It just has to be the last time. And they can't be given any more time to correct on their own. So so the doc's coming to teach and show by example, because that's the best way to do things.
So tell us how you implement that. Because I mean, when I having this conversation, who is your audience to get them to listen and do something about this?
Well, I am banking on the fact, Mark. I'm banking on the fact that there is hunger for this. Okay, and I know there is. I mean, every single person has uttered the phrase, "Why can't the DNC do blank?" Right? Like, why didn't they do blank or whatever, right? Every person I speak with anyway has that, and you can fill in the blank with whatever it might be. Why didn't they come after the GOP for blocking the COVID relief? Or why didn't they, come after the GOP when they, didn't give Merrick Garland a hearing? Like, I mean, there's so many things, right? They never do any of these things. They just, it's like, they're so afraid of going on offense that they have turned us. There's no brand. There's no Democratic brand for voters, right? There's no positive brand anyway. They've let the brand be set by the opposition. The Republican Party, by the way, is a party that has endured first a rebellion in the form of the Tea Party that purged and eliminated its entire moderate class, basically, over the course of a few election cycles. Then had a civil war in the form of the Republican nomination in 2016, which the mainstream of the party lost, okay? And Donald Trump then, in the fluke accident of, Democratic complacency and, again, shitty electioneering, because Clinton Clinton didn't run the campaign, okay? When you're a candidate, you look at your campaign consultants and they tell you what to do. And it doesn't matter if Rachel Bitecofer is there saying, no, don't do that. You need to run field. If you don't run field and the GOP is running field, you're going to lose. Okay.
Reports that the GOP had registered more voters in North Carolina.
Right.
Like,
yes,
that's anathema. When has that ever happened?
Yeah, right. And that should never happen. And it happened because they had voter registration events and we didn't, because there was a pandemic. And the party forbade it. Like, the DNC forbade their candidates from using resources for field. And I had no idea till Labor Day weekend, right? And as soon as I found out, I was like, if you're a Democratic candidate and you see this, you must do field. Like, you must do it. Like,
it is if we do what you're saying, is there enough time to do it? And is there a chance of winning both those seats in Georgia?
Well, there's a fierce urgency of now. So, like, I am fiercely, urgently trying to get everything organized. But once it's going to be very clear that we need to get in position quickly, because the right is looking at 2022 already. And, Biden, whether it's strategic or not, I don't know, but he is setting McConnell up to be in a very difficult position to do the obstruction plan that I still think is the most likely thing that McConnell will do, right? Because cabinet picks are irrefutably qualified. And if you'll notice, they're not newsmakers, okay? They're not people that have news headline, they're not political celebrities for the most part. They're workhorses, not show horses, right? That's not an accident, okay? So he is setting McConnell up so that if McConnell wants to show up, assuming that they win these Georgia seats, and if I can get in there, I'm going to bring these two campaigns. The other one is to tie the two races together, which the DSCC says, oh, don't tie them together. God forbid, don't nationalize the race, because then more Republicans will vote. Republican turnout is going to be big in Georgia Senate, period. Okay? There's nothing that Democrats can do that is going to change that. What they can do, though, is fail to make sure Democratic turnout is also big. And so it has to be that you're telling Democrats, these lower propensity Democrats who are least likely to show up, college students, especially because it's not an accident that the Georgia runoff date is set in a day that's most likely to have college students displaced, right? You have to get them to understand the fate of the world hangs on you voting. Not there's some arcane healthcare policy or this little thing. It's the fate of the world. Like, you have
everything's on the table. So what about Roger Stone? I mean, he's telling people, Republicans, not to vote.
Yeah, we're very lucky for that. We're very lucky for that. And you know what? God bless Roger Stone. I hope he has as much success as possible with his effort to convince Republicans that there's a conspiracy going on with Kelly Loeffler and that they should vote Donald Trump on their write-ins. Because the more votes that go that way, it would be like what happened to us in 2016. Because third-party balloting again is why Donald Trump was elected, and it is not the fault necessarily of third-party balloters. It's the fault of the campaigns who did not notice they had I noticed at the convention fire alarm, man. I mean, that you have this almost have like a riot on the floor of the convention, and the Clinton strategists don't think, hey, we've got a real problem on the progressive base. Like, we probably need to do some serious work to offset this disaffection, right? Because yes, it's only a few voters. It's in the grand scheme of things, but in 2 to 3% in a race that's going to be decided by a point, it's huge.
Right. Folks, you can hear by her very erudition why she's so celebrated. I invite you to follow her at Rachel Bitecofer on Twitter. Rachel, let's stay in close touch, because I think what you're trying to do is important, and we need this perspective. I think this is good advice. And I think, again, what you're saying, people want to make it about ideology,
right,
left versus moderate, but what you're talking about is strategy.
Yes.
And if you do the strategy,
yes,
I'll be honest with you, what AOC and everybody talking about, that ain't the most radical thing to me.
No.
The issue is strategy, and whether we're just going to continue to just do the, let's just be quiet, let's not say anything, let's be nice. And we've dealt with that. People thought Obama was too nice.
Yes.
Nice. And then we throw them lifelines, like Biden saying, well, I've always been able to work across the aisle. You can't work with these people anymore. This ain't the same people that you worked with 20 years ago. These people are crazy. They are completely obstructionists. And when someone says he's not even going to allow your cabinet appointments, he's going to have those.
Yeah.
No.
I think strategically, right, Biden has put McConnell in a great spot, because if you have somebody like me out there ready to do the messaging, right? Because if he blocks this group of people, and you have the messaging the offensive messaging to go out, you go and you frame the whole party as extremist, right? McConnell is an extremist. Biden did everything right. He came to this job open-armed, open heart. He nominated the right people for the right time. And what does the Republican Party do to him when he shows up? They kick him in the balls, right? I mean, you have to make that messaging. Voters, the Democrats don't understand. You shape public opinion, right? You shape it. It doesn't go the other way around. Republicans are shaping and molding public opinion all the time. We need to be doing the same thing. And it takes an offensive strategic approach. Yeah. And I want to say one more thing, because I know the audience here is very progressive. The Republicans are going to try for 2022, their best hope is to pit the moderates and the progressive factions against each other. And so my work is very concerned with, when we're winning, we're not fighting, right? And so, they're going to try to do false flag operations where they pretend to be progressives online, bitching about the moderates, or vice versa. Just give me some time to show you guys how this new strategic, aggressive, democratic, offense can look, because it's not about ideology. And we are really well positioned if we can come after them. My goal is that Mitch McConnell, a year from now, every time his phone chirps, he's going to get a pit in his stomach. Yeah.
All right. Rachel Bitecofer, Bitecofer. Check her out on Twitter. Follow all she does, and we'll be hearing more and more from her and the incredible work she's doing and the inspiration she's giving us. Rachel, thank you once again for joining us on Make It Plain, okay?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, subscribe, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.